Good day, everyone. For today's lesson, we are going to start with outcome based education. What is outcome based education or OBE? Well, it is also known as a standards based education. It is an educational theory that's centered on the goals or outcomes. This means that this one is no longer focuses on trying to finish everything. Instead, the focus is on how the students will be able to reach the main outcome or the main goal. OBE gives emphasis on the idea that we need to look forward on the outcomes, not the inputs. What are the inputs? Well, examples of these are the total time allotment that the students spend in the class or even what textbooks that were given to them. Also, those technologies that we are going to use, those teaching techniques that we're going to incorporate. These were just examples of the inputs. While on the other hand, outcomes may include a range of skills and knowledge that should be concretely measurable, and this is where the writing objectives would come into place. Wherein the objectives should be specific, obtainable by the students, and result relevant since we are on the outcomes. OBE is focused on the criteria and not on the norms. In OBE, students were assessed against absolute objectives instead of reporting the student's achievements compared to that of his classmates. Here, the students is awarded by levels, which indicates that the teacher believes that a student has learned enough of the current material to be able to succeed in the next level of work. Now, let's take a look on how OBE is different from traditional education. The first thing that we need to look for is the curriculum. In OBE, it sets curriculum that is according to the needs of today's students, while on the traditional education, the curriculum is the same and passed on from generation to generation. There is no changes. Second thing is based on the teaching process. In OBE, it is focused on helping the students reach their goals or the outcomes, while on the traditional education, the process is focused on completing the syllabus or the book that is intended for the whole school year. And for the third one is the assessment. In OBE, the assessment is based on the levels that track their learning skills, while on the traditional education, knowledge is assessed per obtained grades. Now, let's talk about the three important OBE models. The first one is the Outcomes Driven Developmental Model or ODDM. Second one is the Spady model. And third one is the Mackerel model. The ODDM is being launched by John Champlain of Johnson City, New York in the early 1970s. It is described as a mastery learning and puts emphasis on the student's role. Here, the teacher takes responsibility for making sure that the students really learn. The second one is the Spady model. This is also a well-known OBE model. It is launched by Bill Spady together with his associates at the High Success Network. Here, there are four principles that characterize OBE. The clarity of focus, design down, deliver up, high expectations, and four expanded opportunities. The third one is the Mackerel model. This is the performance assessment system developed by Bob Marzano and associates at the Mid-Continent Regional Educational Laboratory, or MACRA. This involves writing performance tasks that specifically include elements of several different outcomes in one challenging task.
In continuation of the discussion of outcome-based education, I am here to discuss about its principles and process. As we all know, there are different definitions for outcome-based education. The most widely used one is the four principles suggested by Spady in 1994, and that is already mentioned by Ms. Fabria in her discussion. An outcome-based education curriculum means starting with a clear picture of what is important for students to be able to do, then organizing the curriculum, instruction, and assessment. It is to make sure that learning ultimately happens. Now, Let's focus on the four basic principles. First is the clarity of focus. This means that everything teachers do must be clearly focused on what they want students to know, understand, and be able to do. In other words, teachers should focus on helping students to develop the knowledge, skills, and personalities that will enable them to achieve the intended outcomes that have been clearly articulated. Secondly, designing down, it means that the curriculum design must start with a clear definition of the intended outcomes that students are to achieve by the end of the program. Once this has been done, all instructional decisions are then made to ensure achieve this desired end result. The next is high expectations. It means that teachers should establish high challenging standards of performance in order to encourage students to engage deeply in what they are learning. Helping students to achieve high standards is linked very closely with the idea that successful learning promotes more successful learning. And lastly, expanded opportunities. Teachers must strive to provide expanded opportunities for all students. This principle is based on the idea that not all learners can learn the same thing in the same way and in the same time. However, most students can achieve high standards if they are given appropriate opportunities. I hope that I clearly discussed to you the four basic principles of OBE, and now let's move on with the process of outcome-based education. Here, constructive alignment is the process that we usually follow when we build up an OBE syllabus. It is a term coined by Professor John Biggs in 1990, which refers to the process to create a learning environment that supports learning activities appropriate to achieving the desired learning outcomes. Basically, the word constructive refers to what the learner does to construct meaning through relevant learning activities. The alignment aspect refers to what the teacher does. The key to the alignment is that the components in the teaching system, especially the teaching methods used and the assignments tasks, are aligned to the learning activities assumed in the intended outcomes. It starts with defining curriculum objective and intended learning outcomes, or ILO. Be reminded that a learning outcome is what a student can do as a result of a learning experience. It describes a specific task that he or she is able to perform at a given level of competence under a certain situation. The three broad types of learning outcomes are the disciplinary knowledge and skills. Second, generic skills. And lastly, attitudes and values. And to achieve the effective ILO statements, here are some guidelines for us. Outcomes are about performance, and this implies there must be a performer. And of course, the performer are the students, not the teacher. Next, there must be something performable, thus demonstrable or accessible to perform. Also, it includes the focus is on the performance, not the activity itself or task to be performed. Next is the designing assessment tasks. Outcome-based assessments, or OBA, ask us to first identify what is we expect students to be able to do once they have completed a course or program. It then asks us to provide evidence that they are able to do so. In other words, how will each learning outcome be assessed? What evidence of student learning is most relevant for each learning outcome, and what standard or criteria will be used to evaluate the evidence? Assessment is therefore a key part of outcome-based education and used to determine whether or not a qualification has been achieved. Next to talk about is the reviewing your program level outcomes. This talk with number of outcomes. It is to keep the number manageable. 10 to 20 outcomes are probably the acceptable range. Address intermediate outcomes at a year or course level. Check for overlap to easily differentiable from each other. This is particularly important if you are going to map your curriculum. Next, check for clarity. It is to communicate clearly to students what they need to achieve in the program. Next is to check for representativeness. It informs reader of attributes found in graduate from the program. And lastly, is to check for alignment. Alignment of outcomes at different levels, such as school, program, and course. Alignment between intended learning outcomes, assessments, and teaching and learning activities. Now, let us talk about the writing intended learning outcomes need to be written at both program and course levels. Both of them need two essential elements: a statement of what content are the student is expected to be able to do at the end of learning experience, and the levels of understanding or performance in those content areas. This process includes program learning outcomes. Program learning outcomes defines as statements that describe what students are expected to know and do by the time of graduation. To get started, the school must develop a list of learning outcomes derived from or consonant with the school's mission. The mission and objectives set out the intentions of the school, and the learning goals see how the degree programs demonstrate the mission. That is, the learning outcomes describe the desired educational accomplishments of the degree programs. Next is the course learning outcomes. Course learning outcomes describe the complex performances a student should be capable of as a result of learning experiences within a course. These are determined by the course instructor, or in the case of a course with several sections, by a team of instructors who teach the same course. Lastly, to tackle in this discussion is the choosing an appropriate tool and method. In choosing, we have to remember some rules of thumb. It is the design assessment methods that are aligned with the overall aim of the program. Ensure that have accounted for any requirements set by professional bodies. See that your assessment tasks are aligned with the stated learning outcomes. Use assessment methods that best measure achievement of the stated learning outcomes. And be fair in how much you ask of your students and how much value you assign of each task. A variety of assessment methods is employed so that the limitations of particular methods are minimized and take account of the diversity of students. There is provision for student choice in assessment and tasks, waiting at certain time. If ever you are clueless why a variety of tools and methods is needed, here are some reasons for you. It is in order to achieve constructive alignment and validly assess all of the outcomes. Traditional assessment only assess a fairly narrow range of skills, and with the current expectations to develop students are lifelong learners with a range of transferable and disciplinary skills. A narrow range of assessments is unlikely to be able to assess validly on a wide range of outcomes. A variety of assessment offers all students this advantage under one, the opportunity to possibly excel in the others, to develop students' competences, to take a holistic approach on assessing students' performance. My part in this discussion about outcome-based education ends here, and I hope you gain some knowledge from this report. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I am the next reporter and I will be going to discuss what is OBE, the level of outcomes, and the benefits of outcome-based education. So first, I will discuss what is OBE. OBE, or Outcome-Based Education, is a learner-centered approach to education that focuses on what the student should be able to do in the real world upon completion of their course program. So learning outcomes are complex statements of their primary skills, knowledge, attitudes, abilities, and proficiencies the learner will own at the end of the course. In OBE, the curriculum is carefully constructed by first determining the outcomes, then designed backwards. So the process ensures that the learners are able to demonstrate achievements of outcomes, and that learning outcomes, learning activities or methods, and assessments are aligned. OBE contrasts with traditional education, which primarily focuses on the resources or the content that are available to the student, which are called inputs. It uses methods which are learner-centered and that focus on authentically measuring student performance, and that is the outcome. While outcomes represents the destination of the learner's journey, the route, equipment, tools, and methods of reaching the destination are flexible. This means instructors are still able to customize instructional methods and learning activities in a way that is responsive to the unique needs of their learners. So let's proceed to our next slide, which is the levels of outcomes. So the first levels of outcomes is the course learning outcomes. It represents the integrated skills, knowledge, and attitudes a learner will own upon successful completion of their course. So learning outcomes are written with a verb phrase and declare a demonstrable action within given time frame, such as by the end of the course. The next one is the program outcomes. These are broad statements that describe what graduates of a program will be able to do out there as a result of what they have learned in the program. So program outcomes are narrower statements that describe what students are expected to know and be able to do by the time of graduation. These relate to skills, knowledge, and behaviors that students acquire in their study. So skills students use in managing and applying their knowledge, such as computation, experimentation, analysis, synthesis, design, evaluation, communication, leadership, and teamwork. Next is the Inuit Koyi to Kanji. So Inuit Koyemaya to Kanji is reflect to the thoughtful integration of Inuit knowledge, culture, values, and principles throughout the course or program. So this Inuit Koyemaya to Kanji is often translated as Inuit traditional knowledge or sometimes Inuit traditional technology. And lastly, the college-wide outcomes. So the college-wide outcomes are outcomes that are set across all programs by the institution. Some post-secondary institutions set college-wide outcomes. So this is based on the Conference Board of Canada's Employability Skills 2000, while Inuit Koyemaya to Kanji outcomes are required in all courses and programs. Now let's proceed to our last slide, the benefits of outcomes-based education. So these are the benefits of outcome-based education. First is to provide a strategic way to enhance the quality of teaching and learning. Next is to prepare students for the rest of life context in which they will need to apply what they have learned in their course program. And then provide a framework to align teaching, learning, and assessment methods. Promote a collaborative, collegial approach to curriculum planning. Help to ensure the approval and accreditation of new and existing programs. Provide mechanism for ensuring accountability and quality assurance. Promote a self-directed and autonomous approach to learning. And lastly, provide a means for students to articulate the knowledge, skills, attitudes, and experience acquired during the program. That's all.
Hello everyone, I am Bench Ira B. Estupa and I am the fourth reporter from Group 7, and my report for today is all about item response theory. So what is item response theory? Item response theory, or IRT, is a way to analyze responses to tests or questionnaires with the goal of improving measurement, accuracy, and reliability. So if you want your test to actually measure what it's supposed to measure, like mathematical abilities, your students' reading abilities, or historical knowledge, so IRT is one way to develop your test. So basically, IRT was initially developed on 1950s and 1960s by Mr. Frederick M. Lord and other psychometricians. so Lord on 1952, and he worked with Mr. Novick on 1968. So they had the goal of developing a method table to evaluate respondents without depending on the same items included in the test. Therefore, IRT evolved from classical measurement theory comprised of a variety of mathematical models that have the following characteristics. So these are: first, to predict person's scores based on his or abilities or latent traits. Second is to establish a relationship between person's item performance and the set of traits underlining item performance through function called the item characteristics curve by Hambleton on 1991. So these characteristics are possible because IRT models provide item and ability parameter invariance for test items and persons, when the IRT model of interest actually fits the available test data. So the first step in IRT is the development of a two-dimensional matrix which lists examinees and correct responses. So in the matrix below, 1 represents a correct answer and 0 an incorrect answer. So a total of 5 items and 5 person. So person number 1 got a perfect score. Person number 2 got 3 over 5. Person number 3 got 2, and person number 4 got 1, and person number 5 got 0 answer. So a quick look at this table tells you that person 1 answered 5 questions correctly. So he got 100% proficiency, while person number 3 answered 2 questions, so he got 40% proficiency. However, proficiency isn't the only factor in IRT. You must also take into account the question difficulty. Let's say you had 2 test takers who both get 2 over 5. The first test taker may have answered the 2 easy questions, and the second test taker may have answered the 2 difficult questions. Therefore, although they both scored 40%, their proficiency is not the same. So item response theory takes into account the number of questions answered correctly and the difficulty of the question. The SAT and GRE both used item response theory for their tests. So that would be all for my topic. And for the last reporter, he will tackle about the different models of IRT. And thank you for listening and have a nice day.
Good day, everyone. I am Wendell C. Ibanez from Group 7, and my topic is all about the different models for IRT, or the item response theory. Different models for IRT. IRT, or the item response theory, was first proposed in the field of psychometrics for the purpose of ability assessment. It is widely used in education to calibrate and evaluate items in tests, questionnaires, and other instruments, and to score subjects on their abilities, attitudes, or other latent traits. The IRT, item response theory, provides a useful and theoretically well-founded framework for educational measurement. It supports such activities such as the construction of the measurement instruments, linking and equating measurements, and evaluating of test bias and differential item functioning. There are several key assumptions underlie the IRT framework. The first one is the unidimensionality of the measured trait. The second is the local independence, the monotonicity, and item invariance. IRT was initially developed in the 1950s and 1960s by Frederick Lord and other psychometricians, who had the goal of developing a method able to evaluate respondents without depending on the same items included in the test. The different models for IRT. The first one is the RASH model. It is used to measure latent traits like attitude or ability. It shows the probability of an individual getting a correct response in a test item. The Rush model is a lot simpler and intuitive than many other models. It resembles a ruler, only instead of centimeter or inches, the scale is measured with items. Less difficult items are to the left, more difficult items are to the right. People can also be placed on the same measurement scale, with less able people on the left and more able people is on the right. Let's add 3 people to the scale. Bob, a poor candidate, Chan, fairly good, and Lucy, the excellent one. From the scale, you should be able to tell that Bob is expected to get 2 over 10 questions right. Right items 1 and 2. Chan is expected to get 6 over 10 right, and Lucy is 10 over 10. For the Rush model to work correctly, the test must be on time. Otherwise, you'll be adding a further factor into the mix, or the probability of attempting the item. Rush versus IRT. Unlike item response theory or the IRT, which fits a model to data, a Rush model is created from the data itself. In addition, general IRT theory uses 3 parameters, while the Rush model only uses 1. Due to these differences, some schools of thought do not think Rush and IRT belong to the same category, although you also see plenty of people who do. In essence, it doesn't matter much if they are in the same category or not, as long as you're applying the theory correctly. The second model is the 2-parameter model, which in items response theory, a model that specifies 2 parameters affecting an individual's response to a particular test item. A. The difficulty level of the item. For items with 1 correct alternative worth a single point, the item difficulty is simply the percentage of students who answer an item correctly. In this case, it is also equal to the item mean. The item difficulty index ranges from 0 to 100. The higher the value, the easier the question. When an alternative is worth other than a single point, or when there is more than 1 correct alternative per question, the item difficulty is the average score on that item divided by the highest number of points for any one alternative. Item difficulty is relevant for determining whether students have learned the concept being tested. It also plays an important role in the ability of an item to discriminate between students who know the tested material and those who do not. The item will have low discrimination if it is so difficult that almost everyone gets it wrong or guesses, or so easy that almost everyone gets it right. B. The item discriminability. A statistical measure of how well an item on a test differentiates among subgroups of test takers, typically those individuals who possess a high degree of some ability versus those who possess a low degree of the ability. Item discriminabilities typically are given as correlation coefficients ranging from -1 to +1 in value, with the latter indicating a perfect discriminator. Inheriting correlations also may be used in determining item discriminability. The third and last one is the graded response model. The graded response model represents a family of mathematical models that deals with order polytomous categories. These ordered categories include ratings such as letter grading A, B, C, D, and F, used in the evaluation of students' performance. Strongly disagree, agree, and strongly agree used in attitude surveys, or partial credit given in accordance with an examinee's degree of attainment in solving a problem. That would be all. Thank you.